Hello and welcome to Gŵyl Haf, and welcome to the first of our talks about Creole, Patois and nation languages. Today I'm joined by Désirée Reynolds, a writer, broadcaster and journalist. Désirée, thank you very much for being here.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me.
No, not at all. Désirée is the author of Seduce. It came out with People Tree Press in 2013. They're also very kindly sponsoring this talk, so a big thank you to them. And yeah, I think let's just dive into it. Obviously, a kind of stark feature of the book is that it's written in Jamaican patois or nation language. Could you talk a little bit about this decision and how that's kind of influenced some elements of the book?
So I kind of wrote it in a different way, in a more standardized English way, and it just didn't work. I didn't write the whole book. I think I must have had only about 30,000 words or something, where it was the same story, but in standardized English. And then when I went to look at it, it didn't feel right. It didn't read well. And I realized I needed to change it, but I didn't quite know how or where or what I was going to do. And then I rocked up to People Tree, and they were like, "Well, Jeremy, who's an amazing editor, said, oh, well, how do you hear it?" And well, I don't hear it in that English. I hear it in my head. I hear it in Patois. I was like, well, write it down. Um, then I'm like, oh yeah, I can do that. So that's what I did. And then even though it was still like maybe a few years off from what you see now, it felt easier, it flowed better. And part of one of the things that writers have to do is to make a decision about what point of view you're going to take, not just the story. Once you have the story, to think about, well, what angle am I coming from? What's the tense that I'm going to write it in? Which character is going to be my main character? And as soon as I worked out the language of the book, that all kind of really seamlessly fell into place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the kind of community voices, if you want to call it, I don't know, it's quite sort of but the kind of community of voices and the way that you hear these kind of different perspectives on the same event and the way that the book sits in response to one event that's then seen kind of in a kind of circular narrative, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The language really adds to that.
Yeah, I think that it was that the problem was language. So I teach creative writing as well, and what I say to people that I'm working with is like a story is like a castle, and you're kind of knocking on the walls to find a way into the story. The story's there, it's all there, but you're trying to find ways in, be it a moat, be it up the walls, be it like ramming the walls down. You're trying to find a way into the story. And what I found is, as soon as, like I said, as soon as I did the language, as soon as I worked out that that's how I can hear the story, that the variety of characters spoke to me in different ways, in different kind of degrees in patois. Like Pastor Collins is probably a little less than, say, Seduce's voice, but they all spoke to me in various degrees in that language, and that's how it, for me, managed to just kind of work. As a reader, you can tell me whether it worked or not in terms of working quite hard to make sure all the voices, whilst all being different degrees of patois, that they were actually slightly different depending on their education, whether they'd been off the island and come back, or whether they'd stayed there, whether they were younger or older, that kind of thing, and even gender.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things, particularly when it comes to what you're talking about hearing the language, because, and I think Caitlin in another talk was talking about kind of subvocalizing, and that's and sort of the attention to the inner ear that you have to pay when reading this book is much more of a kind of feature of the reading experience, I suppose. And I think something I was quite interested in as well was tempo. The Lampies speaking as a chorus. It's kind of quick fire, And then it really slows down, even for someone like Glory, for example, who, while still speaks, you know, uses some patois, is much more kind of measured in her timing, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, and that speaks to character, in like, who are they and what are they trying to say and how do they wish to be heard. And like, you know, I love an unreliable narrative. I love that confusion of what you're hearing to what you're saying and the differences in that. And I think Glory and Hyacinth typify that to quite, I mean, Hyacinth's a little bit of comedy really, to like quite a massive extent, but Glory is far more subtle and nuanced, I think, where what she's thinking and what she's doing and what she's speaking is all different. All of it is different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you talk about an unreliable narrative, that's so reinforced by it being in the first person and addressed to an audience, because it feels like you're hearing gossip. It feels like you're hearing this kind of everyone's confiding in you, the reader. And that being in first person is obviously so influenced by it being written in patois.
Exactly. And I love first person. A lot of writers, I think they're a little bit snobby, actually. A lot of writers who think that first person's a bit of a cheat. I've heard this before by writers far, far bigger and greater than me, thinking that somehow first person is a bit of a cheat. I'm not quite sure why it would be. As far as I'm concerned, the reading is not a passive thing. Reading is an active thing, and I'm engaging with my reader. And I suppose the first person is the way to just immediately get to that character, immediately get to the heart of the character and what they feel about whatever situation they're in. And the story came and felt better in that way, really, that I could. So I changed, and not only did I change the language, I changed tenses. So, you know, I lost 30,000 words when I realized these 30,000 words, they're not working. They
So
don't
the
do
first
it.
30,000 words were written in what, the third person?
Yes.
Okay, okay. So you've written 2 books then.
Listen, I've written a lot of books that probably no one will ever see.
Yeah.
They're all sat on a junk folder or on on another hard drive that's probably not even big enough to contain it all. And every writer that I know probably writes 2 or 3 times the amount that actually gets published.
Yeah. It's interesting you talk about reading being an active thing and something that requires kind of engagement from both author and reader, because language is the same, right? Language is an active thing. It's a kind of living organism. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. I hate these really kind of pretentious ways of speaking about language that I'm falling into, but it's not passive. It can never be passive.
No, and that's that you can that's illustrated in the way that words can mean different things to different people, that the same word can mean a different thing to different people, or if you say the same word, how you say that word will mean something different. And I think that's what I was trying to get across. Like I say, readers can tell me whether I did it or not, but where even the same word said by different people means different things.
And in that way, kind of relates back to this conversation about how it's in some ways not dissimilar from poetry, right? Because that technical aspect of the writing is something that was never afforded to poets, essentially, to do anything else. Maybe in the novel you have the space, you have the words to kind of go back on yourself, but if you're writing tight verse or whatever, you have to pay that attention to the individual word and what that means and what it can mean.
Yes, absolutely. And I consider myself a poetic prose writer, in that all of the things that I do, because I'm so concerned with language, it's pretty obvious when you read any of my stuff that it, you know, if I wasn't so bad at poetry, maybe I would have been a poet instead.
I know, I saw you mentioned that you have a junk folder full of poetry that's never going to see the light of day.
No.
There's so much but there's so much in the book that I think would lend itself really well, you know. Obviously I'm not gonna, you know, well, I am gonna ask you to publish your poetry right here. But I don't know, is that What's the relationship between the two mediums? Is there one? Do you think it's a kind of extension? Do you write poetry differently?
No, I don't. They're just shorter sentences and arranged differently on the page, and therefore this is what makes me not be a poet, is because it's too simplistic. My approach to poetry is too simplistic, and my approach to prose is far more complicated. And that's why my friends who are poets are like, nah, no, stick to what you do. um, but I'm also a big fan of poetry. I read quite a lot of poetry, and so I think that inevitably seeps down into whatever it is that I write. Again, it's about my concern with language and how it sounds, not just what it means, but what does it feel like? What does it feel like to say? What's your mouth doing? What's your brain doing? How do you feel it in your chest? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of something that with this book in particular, about it being in patois, which for a long kind of part of its history has been mainly an oral language.
Yeah.
And I was speaking to another people tree writer, Barbara Jenkins, who was saying that it was kind of only really written from the 70s onwards, written down. And you've written this book in patois that's in the first person with this non-linear narrative kind of structure. You're kind of subverting this and drawing it out, right? Because it's written as it's spoken. It's a dialogue heavy book.
Yeah.
But it's still on the page. It's still happening in a physical book, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. You've summed it up really nicely. I couldn't add any more. I mean, that's exactly what I tried to do. I think I'm a writer I'm quite hard on myself, stupidly so. So if I've got a job to do, I will choose the hardest way round in which to do it, and the most difficult and complex way to tell a story. But it did come quite easily in that form. And I wanted to think about how we talk and how to get how we talk on the page. And I think there's lots of writers that are concerned with this kind of form, or this kind of what we do about language. Lots of writers think about it, and there's been loads of stuff written about how we write, how we think, and how that works. And again, it's different from region, it's different from history, gender. How we think is just one of those difficult things that writers keep trying to conquer. And I suppose the writers that maybe do that to the best, in the best way, maybe playwrights who are writing specifically for the voice. So therefore, how they tackle the language will be different to a prose writer, to a poet, etc.
Well, it's interesting because, another thing that you do, because you I think have written film scripts in the past, but another thing that you do in this book is there are similarities to a play as well. You have an ensemble list at the beginning of the book. The lampies act as a kind of chorus. It's divided into movements. You very much embraced elements of playwriting.
Yeah, because I love it. I love playwriting. Again, I have a drawer full of plays that probably sat next to the poetry collection, which won't see the light of day either. I think what I like, I think it's only in this country perhaps where we think about writers as being very specific, where you are a playwright, or you're a script writer, or you're a poet. It's very delineated. Whereas in other countries, you're a writer, and therefore you write anything. You write poetry, you write plays, you write books, you write radio plays, you write articles. It seems to me that it's here where we kind of try and keep them all separate, when for me, it all feels like one continuous thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Could you talk a little bit about, I don't know, you're kind of, I don't know, I suppose your preferences when it comes to writing, about how you kind of, why you've made the choices that you made, why you've had, because this book would be similar to a play in some respects without an ensemble list. There are these kind of very specific things that you've drawn. How did you come to the decisions, that you made, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really wanted to do, and I feel like this is quite a difficult thing, and Toni Morrison talks a lot about this, is writing without the white gaze. So to attempt to write a story that's wholly without the gaze, not referencing it at all, not consider, I mean, it doesn't mean to say that people can't enjoy the book. I want everybody to enjoy it. It's not to the exclusion of anyone, but to try and write without the gaze was one of the definite decisions that I made. And that's why it helped me to make the decision about writing in patois, because it's without the white gaze. It's something that's it's between Caribbean peoples, and something, and even then between islands, you know, from Trinidad to Jamaica to Cuba to Barbados, they're all different. They have all different amazing literary traditions. But I kind of felt like that writing without the white gaze was something that I really, really wanted to try and do. And that's one of the decisions that I actually made a decision, because quite a lot of the times I'm an instinctive writer. So some writers know exactly what they're going to do from start to finish. They plan their chapters, and I envy them. I think, wow, you know, I would love to be that writer, but I'm not. When I'm writing, I'm on the same journey that you are as you're reading, and I think it gives it a different feel. It can work or it cannot work, but I'm also discovering stuff as I'm writing and as you're reading. So that's also one of the things that happened, which wasn't necessarily a decision, but more something that happened instinctively. And the other things about certain decisions. So I talked with Jeremy quite a lot about having like a family tree. To you know, maybe that might help, or to have like a not a bibliography, but an index explaining all the words, and then I just was like, nah, not doing that, because if you can read Shakespeare and Chaucer, I mean, not to say that you want to read Shakespeare or Chaucer, certainly not. I never did when I was younger. But you know, like when you're even reading something like Dickens or any of the Brontes, the language is completely different. And I felt like if we can do that, then we can more likely do this.
It's really interesting that you bring those writers up, because obviously I don't speak patois, and reading this book, I went through the same process of, it takes me 5 minutes to get into the language. I can't just kind of pick it up and go. I need to sort of read a couple of pages twice and sort of go back over myself before I can move on. And yeah, exactly. That's exactly the kind of impact that it had on me, I suppose. And it's really interesting kind of talking about writing without the white gaze, because I think it links into this conversation that is slowly happening about whose stories get told. But kind of specifically with this book, but obviously, you know, we're a festival of language. What language do those stories get told in?
Yeah, exactly. And that's about power, isn't it? And about who's in charge of the stories, and how are they being told. Again, a lot of other writers have tackled this subject way better than me. But I'm thinking about, so when we talk about English and working about diaspora writing in English, it's actually quite a big deal in thinking about what language do you want to write in. I mean, I'm presuming that you also write in Welsh too.
Not me. This is the first time I've admitted this on Gŵyl. I'm not Welsh.
It's an exclusive.
Yeah, so no, I'm English, English British, yeah, but not Welsh. So no, I don't.
But okay, but the okay, so if we move over that one. Sorry, blazed you out. Okay. So, but the like the choices, again, about the choices that you make. So for me, being from the Caribbean, my parents are from the Caribbean, which was colonized by the English and also the French and also the Spanish at various different points in history. since it's English, I'm writing in patois and in English. I'm speaking English because my African language was ripped away from me. And when we think about writing, like in Ngugi wa Thiong'o, in Decolonizing the Mind, talks about language. Fanon talks about language. Toni Morrison, Camus Braithwaite, coining the term nation language, and what we choose, what language we choose to write in, if we have a choice. Some people don't have a choice. And I find that fascinating, trying to work that out as I'm writing. Like, okay, how can I hear this word that I know in English is this, but that English word doesn't really do that thing justice. So I can hear my mom saying it like this. I can hear my grandma saying it like this. And that's the word that I chose. And then of course I had to kind of, it was like Barbara Jenkins said about it being notarized. I made up loads of spellings because I was writing phonetically.
Yeah. And it's interesting you talk about your mother and your grandmother, because you said in an interview with Alessia McKenzie, who we're also speaking to this week, that you were writing in Big People Talk.
Hi.
Yeah. Will do. Yeah. So, because she runs Southern World Arts News, Caribbean Translation Project. So there's a whole talk with her that Caitlin's done. If people want to go and see that. But yeah, you talked about Big People Talk and about sort of writing what you heard as a kid.
Yeah. Yes. And now it's quite difficult. You know, I tell my children it's Big People Talk. They look at me like, "What are you talking about? You make no sense whatsoever, Mom." But the way that the information is policed and peopled by adults, between adults and children, between even adults and adult children, and how we don't give the right information, which is what I wanted to show in Seduce, is that our elders are liars and also full of silences and things that they don't tell us because they feel like they're protecting us, or they've just clean forgotten, or they want to put a particular spin on it, which is why I kind of love history in a way, because it is a story. No matter what we think about it being facts, it's actually fiction and seen through the different eyes of different people. So the idea of speaking to our elders and kind of ancestor worship in a way, which is what Seduce is a little bit about. But the ancestors are here and living and talking, as Seduce is here and living and talking to us, and recognizing that we're not talking about her in the way that she wants to be talked about, and we're not doing the ancestral stuff that she wants, and that's where the lampies come in to try and fix what we perhaps have lost.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it kind of that in a sense links to a really interesting kind of theme of morality, righteousness, who is kind of I don't know, yeah, who is righteous basically, who is moral, because everyone thinks it's them. Hyacinth thinks it's her. You know, Seduce thinks it's her. The Lampies think it's them. Gloria, you know, and it goes back to the structure being kind of inherently contradictory, and how sort of no one can agree on everything. But interestingly as well, a lot of people love Seduce as well. This is what it kind of boils down to: is that actually, you know, you've got Mikey, you've got Marshall, you've got Pastor Collins. You know, a lot of men in particular love Seduce, right?
Yeah.
And the Lampies love Seduce, but she plays different roles in their minds. She's a different person for each individual kind of character, I suppose. And yeah, I don't know. There's just a lot of mythology, I suppose, local mythology that surrounds their relationships with her.
Yeah, I think I was trying to think about death, and the way, and the death is a massive Caribbean concern, and the way that the rituals form a huge underpinning for our lives, more so than marriage, more so than christenings. Death and funerals it's big business also. My mum swears that the that when the West Indian people came over and the Caribbean came over to British shores, that they saved funeral directors who as rituals become smaller and smaller and smaller in the Caribbean, they've just gone bigger, bigger and bigger. And we brought that with us in terms of like celebrating a person's life, honoring a person's life. At a funeral, you know, arguments will happen, music is played, food is eaten, it goes on, especially if you honor the whole 9 nights tradition. And it's something that as generationally we kind of end up losing a little bit. But for me, having gone to a few funerals with parents, and now and having lost a parent myself, I kind of saw the funeral tradition as theatre, as spectacle, and that's probably what triggered thinking about a funeral. And also, it's obviously it's a limited time, isn't it? You know, it can't go on and on forever. It's got to at some point reach its own conclusion, which is the burying or the releasing, or if you're cremating, it's a different thing, but it comes to some kind of conclusion. And the idea that who are funerals for? It's not for the person that's died, it's for all of us who want to say something, want to contribute something, want to sing something, want to dance something, want to share something. And I wanted to the spectacle of a Caribbean funeral and what that means to all the different players. I wanted to kind of capture that and to tap into how much theatre there is, how much high drama it is. And people say, is it time for a funeral? It's not sad. It can be sad, but it is that, isn't that a party? Is that, do we bring food? Is there, you know, it means something different to different people. And I think about it in terms of other like Latin American countries and how they view death and how they view how they view like people that are dead who aren't really dead, who are live with them still in their rituals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is the first book I think I've read where the main character is dead and also an active cast member. You know, she Seduce kind of speaks to us from not beyond the grave, because the book concludes in her funeral, but from sort of beyond death, right? But she's not present in a kind of physical human body, but she's still present in the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And of course that on one hand, as a writer, that also then frees you up, doesn't it, to kind of, you can flit here, you can flit there, you're not necessarily trapped in a body that has to be in one place, and then you have to work out how you move that body from here to there, or how you get that body to mention this that's happening over there. If they're not there, how can they see it? But then at the same time, it creates a huge amount of difficulty, because, you know, can you hang on to this? Where's it going? It can, at some point, you know, I'm wondering, like, is Seduce just running away, just running amok and doing her own thing, and I'm having to kind of draw her back in. Look, you're at your own funeral. Let's talk about that. Let's not wander off and think about other stuff or other politics or whatever. But I like that death is a huge part of Caribbean life. And it's something that we tell a lot of ghost stories to kids as a method of control, absolutely, but also as a method of passing down traditions. Like, you can see there's certain characters that are also there in Yoruba mythology, that's also there in other mythologies from other countries in Africa. So it's a way of holding on to those things and then passing them on in those stories. But also a way of discussing death in a way that isn't scary, that doesn't feel like it's something over there that we're too terrified of, but making it something that's real in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And returning to the kind of conversation you were saying about the theatre of death or the theatre of funeral, there's a particular piece of imagery which I don't know how to sort of describe it without giving the game away for people that haven't read the book, but there's a particular piece of imagery that with some rum is sprinkled on a live goat. There's a Pastor Collins is a Christian minister who's spent some time on the mainland. He sees this and it really rocks him. He really calls into question his kind of faith, his identity. This is a real, it doesn't break him. Maybe it defines him. I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of overturning of an idea that you thought you had or you have, and then having to change it. And I think Pastor Collins goes through the most amount of changes in the way that, say, I might go through a change where I'm thinking, I'm going to write this in English, and then I'll no, this isn't working. I have to write it in this way. And Pastor Collins is probably having his own moment where it's like, okay, I worship and I have a faith like this, but now that I'm here, and now I won't give the game away too much, but now that I'm seeing this person being buried in this way or being celebrated in this way, or this funeral is happening in this way, I don't feel like it's something that's of the devil, which is what I've been taught for years and years. This is right for who she is. And that's a massive learning that he has to go through. And I think that's what I'm asking the readers to do also. It's like, check this out as another way of thinking about something. That doesn't mean you don't have to agree with me. That's cool. But see it as something other than what you normally think of as faith or religion or Christianity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that links quite nicely as well to it's a book of conflicts in many ways, or maybe not conflict, but it's a book of opposites, definitely.
Yeah.
And you kind of play an awful lot of things. So I've just written a couple down. You've got sort of mainland, colony, community, individual. There's male, female as well. Particularly, I thought Honey Rock was a great example of this.
A lot of people like it. What did you like about Honey Rock, Will?
I'm not sure it's what I liked about him. Again, I don't know how to do this without sort of giving the game away, but there's a particular instance where a specifically male freedom becomes incredibly erotic.
Yeah.
This almost blunt critique going on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted at least to have that bit in where people go, in particular women go, oh right, yeah. Oh yeah, we recognize that. Oh yeah, I've been there. And I've heard that person speak many a time, and that person's been in my house, and that person's been in my bed, and that person is I don't see them anymore, or I still like them, or I wanted to have that in there as something that's quite typical in a way, without being cliched, which is quite hard to do.
Yeah. No, I thought it was I don't know, it's one of these kind of combinations of humor that makes a point, right? You couldn't have written someone, the point doesn't get made unless it's funny, you know?
Yeah, because I'm taking the mickey out of him, really, and he deserves every second of it.
And it's something you do quite a lot, is this gentle mockery. You're not afraid to create someone just to poke fun at them.
Yeah, I mean, no one's ever asked me that before, or mentioned that, which is, thanks, Will. That's interesting. Gentle mockery is what I'm going to tell my mom the next time she has a go at me for taking the mickey out of her. Gentle mockery, Mom. I don't know what your problem is. I think also thinking about humor and how we think. So going a little bit back to what we were talking about with language, and the idea that language shapes thought, and that language can also shape humor, right? So my mom and dad's humor is particularly Caribbean, and Caribbean humor is kind of harsh. It's cutting, it's pointed. It can leave you like, oh my gosh, is that funny, or is that just brutal? I'm not sure. Should I be laughing or am I in tears? I don't know what to do with my face. or with my emotion. And Caribbean humor is really can be, not all of it, obviously. And there's things like when you listen to, say, Miss Lou, whose humor is very, very, she's mocking, but she's also very sweet and loving as she does it. And I was thinking, actually, when I think about it, my humor is actually from my parents. So it is very Jamaican, that mockery of establishment figures and of people who are pompous, uh, especially, you know, people like Marshall and Pastor Collins himself. You know, he gets ripped up by a few people who think that he's just an idiot and that what the hell does he think he's doing. But I think I was thinking about language and how you hear stuff and how you hear humor, and it's a little bit like what language is your anger in? So what language is your humor in? So what language is your anger in? Mine tends to be, because the angriest people in my life were my parents, because they were bringing us all up. They were Jamaican, so my anger, I can hear it in Jamaican, or like something nearish that. And now my kids are like, you know, they're very used to me referring to things they know nothing about. They don't know what a duppy is, or what a junkro is, or, you know, what's a crocus bag? What are you talking about? But I will say it, and they know that that's not good.
Do you find that your language of anger and your language of humour are fairly similar? Do you think they bleed
Yes,
into each other at all?
yes, I think they do, because it's the human condition. I think that all of our languages and all of our feelings merge into each other. Do you not think that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a very thin band where every extreme emotion exists, right?
Yeah, yeah, and extreme times as well, finding the humor in something that's completely and utterly devastating.
Hmm.
And my family did that quite a lot, you know, and going back to Caribbean funerals, and there's a lot of laughter there. There's a lot of taking the mickey out of the person in the box. You remember when they did that? You remember what
Well,
they
they
did?
can't defend themselves, you know?
Well, no, but also it gives people, because they're not there anymore, people can chat about them like they wouldn't have done if they were there. So there's not necessarily the reverence, I think, is probably what I'm talking about, or trying to work out, is the reverence isn't the same. And when I've been to other funerals with other cultures, and it's super quick, and I don't know where I am. You know, like if you've got a Caribbean funeral, people phone each other up, bring you good shoes, because you're going to be standing all day. Bring a bottle of water, maybe a little something to eat in your purse. If you've got kids, bring something for them. It's going to take a long time. And I've always been like, well, in other cultures, going to other funerals, it's super quick. Um, there's no hanging around afterwards. I'm sort of back in my house within like a couple of hours, and think, how did that funeral go like that? So sorry, I don't know why I'm going back to the funeral bit, but yeah, thinking about what that language and pain and pleasure, that whole thing being very, very close together without sounding like a horrible, trashy romance novel.
Yeah. No, but it's true, isn't it? I mean, I didn't think we'd get onto pain and pleasure today. I haven't prepared for that.
Too early, Will.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I think you sort of paid homage in a way then, to Caribbean funerals in general. Actually, this book is more than just, that's more than a plot point. Um, it's actually you, yeah, paying homage to Caribbean funerals.
Yeah, you know, it's something that has just permeated my life. You know, I remember going to funerals and not knowing what was happening. I remember going to see a friend of my mom's, who would have been an auntie. All friends of your parents are aunties and uncles, um, and going to see her in a hospice, and she just died. So we kind of got there a little bit too late, and my mom sat with the body, and I, as a child, kind of, I think I was an early teenager, like 11 or 12, sat in the room with with a dead body, with my mum talking to her and all her friends kind of holding hands and just chatting about her and stuff. And then we were going home, so you know it would have been the start of the 9 nights and the preparation for that, and my mum cooking and people in and out the house. So my mum, so we were driving. I'm not sure which uncle this was driving us back to the house, and a cat, a black cat, ran out into the road, and I don't want to say her name, but let's call her Mary. So Mary, who's my mom, who's my auntie, I knew her as Auntie Mary, my mom's good friend. They were saying Mary's in the road trying to get us to join her because they saw the cat and we had to swerve. And they were cussing and laughing, like, Mary, go along about your business. You just tried to get us because you want us to join you. And I remember that memory so well about that. You know, my brain is going, but Mary's in the bed and her face looks a different color and she's not smiling anymore. And, you know, her hands felt papery and she was cold because I touched her. She was cold. But yet this car full of adults with me sat in the middle, and them just having a whale of a time, cussing her out, saying, why are you trying to kill us? We're not ready to die yet. We're going to celebrate you in a minute. What are you doing? You know, and I remember thinking, these people are crazy. What are they talking about? This cat's not Auntie Mary, but was it? Was it not? Who knows?
No, absolutely. And that goes back to the kind of conversation about people being present after they die. And the book is really nicely bookended by a couple of sections called Souls, where it makes it very clear that someone's physical body is just a kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, like a manifestation.
Yeah.
We discussed yesterday that I don't like.
You're gonna have to say it, Will.
I don't. Yeah, it's all to do with language, isn't it? But the body is a kind of impermanent vessel.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a house for something that we shed at some point, and move on to something else, which is what that's what I'm implying in the book, that it's, like you say, it's temporary, and that I don't know, you're probably too young to be a parent, but when you go through perhaps having a child and watching a child grow, and the way it feels like first of all, it feels like a miracle that you've survived having this child in the first place. It feels like a miracle as that baby's growing. You're like, how is this child going to come out? I don't understand. The physics don't work. How am I going to deliver this? This just doesn't work. And as a parent, and particularly as a woman, I think all these things that you just don't have any control over. You just don't get how it's going to work and how it's going to happen. And then what it actually does happen, this baby actually is born, and then you kind of the way that you care and the way that you notice a baby having characteristics or feelings or something that they can't quite articulate, obviously, because language is yet to come. But as a parent, you're like, well, I feel like I know what this, lots of times this child is crying and you don't know what they want and you do everything. It's like a rote thing. Feeding, changing, feeding, changing, cuddles, feeding, changing, which one. But at some point, you get a sense of who they are without language. And I think that's the thing that I wanted to, I think that's the thing that I wanted to get across. Sorry, I've forgotten your question. I've probably waffled on a bit too much now, but I wanted to think about people as not necessarily being the thing that we think it is.
Yeah. I can't remember what my question was either, but what I was thinking about there was is this thing about, we're talking about death, we're talking about Auntie Mary, and now we're talking about being a parent, and again it goes back to death and birth. Are sort of in this thin band of extreme emotion. They're in this kind of one zone where everything seems to happen, everything extreme seems to happen. life is no different from that, I guess.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
absolutely. And I think whilst we have different cultures and different rituals, death and taxes. This
yeah.
is the universal thing that we can say about everything, not just everyone, but everything at some point goes. And it's something that you'd think would unify us, but doesn't, obviously, as recent news events have shown us. And I think I wanted to talk about the universality of it, but in a very specific way, if that makes any sense.
Well, yeah, could you go into that a little bit, actually, in the specificity of it, but also the universality of it?
Well, I could see the look on your face there. We're like, what is she talking about? I think it's because being being a Black woman in England, and feeling very separate from things. I was brought up in London. I now live in Sheffield, and sort of feeling like the odd person out a lot of times within your own spaces, but not necessarily within your own culture. So I guess I wanted to show that, and I wanted to display the idea of like everybody dies, but we all die in different ways. And then we are and we all celebrated in different ways, or not celebrated at all. And the when somebody, when it's in the news and somebody tragically dies, and everybody says, oh, they were a lovely person, like neighbors, they'll talk to neighbors. I'm lucky here, I've got nosy neighbors. And they are lovely, and I'm grateful to them, and since the pandemic and all kinds of things, they're just lovely people. Like, I live in a really nice area. I have lived in other areas which aren't so nice. But when somebody dies tragically and somebody says, oh, but they were lovely, and I think, how do you know? How do you know they were lovely? I feel quite fortunate, but I also know a lot of people do not know each other that live next door. They don't know each other. They've never seen each other, or if they do, it's probably early in the morning or in the evening. How do you know what goes on? And I think I wanted to show that in a way
Yeah.
that there are things that we all do, like we all die, but at the same time, it's how we're celebrated or talked about is entirely different.
And that's one of the kind of interesting things as well, I suppose, is how differently Seduce is understood and how differently she's celebrated. And there are some people who really, in the book, who really don't hold back on their kind of venom of what they think she's done and where they think she's going. But then the Lampies hold a funeral, not just for Seduce, but for every lost Lampie.
Yeah.
Right? She kind of goes into this pantheon, right?
Yeah.
And it is a kind of joyful expression of love, right?
Yeah.
So even within the one community, there's almost specificity to a person in how they're mourning her.
Yeah.
Her.
Well, because people are complicated, and because life is complicated, and life for women is complicated, and it would be too simplistic to have it that way. Somebody dies, oh, boohoo, everybody's sad, and then, okay, let's eat and drink and let's go home. It's not real. It doesn't feel like it's a real thing. And I wanted to, whilst it has this kind of extravagant souls and Seduce is dead and stuff like that, I also wanted to root it in the realness of people's own pain. And I think Pastor Collins and Glory, they are in the most pain in the book, whereas other people are more accepting of what's going on. Those two characters are the characters that are not just fighting what's going on, but fighting themselves as well.
Well, yeah, because that's something I was hoping we'd get onto, actually, is this kind of search for self-determination. And everything you just said, people are complicated, people are, adults lie, people are complex. They all deny each other self-determination. Glory doesn't know her father. Pastor Collins doesn't know his mother.
Yeah.
Mikey doesn't know up from down, because he's so in love with Seduce. They're all kind of looking for a kind of rootedness in themselves, I guess. And what prevents that is often other cast members.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, because we're horrible. Because as well as being who we are and complicated, we're also mean-spirited, and we're jealous, and we want things that other people have, and we want to be the first to be something or somebody or somewhere, the first for anything. Um, and I wanted to show that kind of quite nakedly. These sets of people are their own worst enemies.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, should we talk a little bit about things you do outside of writing novels? Um, you also do, is it Off the Shelf,
Yeah.
a festival of words that's based in Sheffield? Do you
Yeah.
want to talk to people a little bit about that?
Well, that's a recent thing. I did it last year and I'm doing it again this year. So I realized that we are at a point where particularly Black women are being published in unprecedented amounts. Now, when I started writing quite early on, this was never, I never dreamed that that the landscape would look as it does now. So I wanted to try and celebrate that, really. And whilst we're trying to fight for justice and equity and stuff, I thought, well, hang on, look at this, look at where we are. If you talk to older writers, you know, like Barbara Jenkins, although not much older, don't let her trust me out, please. Um, you know, she will tell you about where Black women's writing was to where it is now, and Black women's writing has been defined by African American women's writing, and whilst I love it, Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, I love them, June Jordan, all of those. At the same time, where Black British women sat is still quite new in a way, when it isn't new, because obviously there's been Black British women writing and publishing for as long as there have been people in this country, but it still feels quite new. And I wanted to honor that in a way and celebrate that. So I approached Off the Shelf and said, look at this, you know, and this city, Sheffield, has me, it has Yvonne Battle Felton, who has been shortlisted for various prizes. And it just felt like, you know, the city has a lot more writers and a lot more Black women writers than we realize, and I wanted to try and celebrate that. So I'm a curator, which is quite tough because my ideas are bigger than my budget.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, yeah, can we have this person? Well, you know, so I get told that we don't have the money quite often, but I reach for them, and reach for big ones to get them to knock me down again, but somebody might say yes. So that's what I do. And also, what I also wanted to do was not just to have big ones, but also to combine that with local talent. There's a lot of local talent here. There's a lot of way younger than me, Black British talent, and I living in Sheffield, and I wanted to celebrate that by pairing them together. So it went really well last year, and I'm doing it again this year. So I'm just in the middle of sorting that out. So cross fingers that works. But I have just got a writer in residency. That's quite exciting for the Sheffield Archives, and sort of because it's on the back of. I'm not going to test you now, but I wrote a short story called "Born on Sunday Silent" about a Ghanaian baby that was born in a mock village in Sheffield in 1902. And I wanted to give her a voice. So I've written this short story about her, and out of that has come quite a lot of interesting work with the archives, because it's I'm trying to tease out the marginalized voices in the archives. They're there, we just don't know about them.
Absolutely. It goes back to what you said, I think, fairly sort of early in the talk about, you know, history is a story, and what we've been given is a kind of a narrative. You know, it is a one-sided narrative, as
Exactly.
opposed to a kind of factual series of events.
Yeah.
and back to the conversation as well about whose stories get told, because I think, you know, and Peter Fryer, you know, let's all go and read Peter Fryer. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, we had a phone call last night, and we were speaking a little bit, or you were speaking a little bit about actually this kind of illusion of a post-colonial state,
Yes.
and actually Black women's writing in Britain doesn't necessarily exist in this kind of I don't know, this as we're not as sort of far forward, we're not as modern, we're not as kind of, we're not where we think we are. And again, that's history being written fictitiously.
Yeah.
Do you want to get into that a little bit?
Well, how much time have you got? Because I could go on. I think it's typified by the narratives around Brexit. If you want to use like a recent example of what we mean by history, and what we mean by kind of a rewriting history or an ignoring of history. If you think about the narratives around Brexit and the idea of British exceptionalism, and what is it that people are fighting for? Did that even exist in the first place? And do you really want to go back to imperialism, which was founded on racism and white supremacy? Do you want to go back to that? And some, well, to be fair, some people clearly do want to go back to that, as some of my trolls have told me to go back to. But then also, it goes back to not really, the real history is something not really being told. So not to say that education is everything, because sometimes, that I've just said, education can work, but also there are some people that are quite happy with white supremacy, so education is not going to do anything for them. They want the position that they are holding. But what I find fascinating now is a kind of a reclaiming of a Black Britishness that hasn't been done to this extent before. It's always been done by various different writers. S.I. Martin, phenomenal book called, is it Uncomparable Worlds? Beautiful, amazing book, which is about the, yes, write it down, which is about the soldiers, the enslaved that fought for the side of the British during the American War of Independence. So Britain promised them 40 acres and a mule, right? Mm-hmm. And Britain lost, or England lost. England lost America as a colony. So we're not talking about the American Civil War, we're talking about the America's War of Independence. So when England lost America, quite a lot of, they made these promises to these, if you leave your plantations and come and fight for the English, we will free you, which is what they said, and they lied and they lost. So there was quite a lot of ex-soldiers that were in England, and particularly what S.I. Martin writes about, they're in London. So these, and then, you know, I think also David Sharma wrote a massive tome, which is brilliant, about how these soldiers were, or ex-soldiers, are taken to Nova Scotia and to Senegal. So I don't know why I came onto that, but I think it's just about thinking about a Black British history. Those soldiers that were here would have had kids. Some of them stayed, some of them got married, some of them opened businesses, some of them managed to get away. This is quite important. So to think about England as being a wholly white country is just a little bit silly, and or to think about the history as being wholly white is telling, because we're displaying a level of ignorance that means that but then the ignorance is imposed because this stuff isn't talked about that much and isn't written about. And apart from those Black scholars that have been doing it, and white scholars actually that have been doing it for a long time, now it's become a part of a national debate. But still, if you go on Twitter or Facebook, the national debate tends to be framed by people that don't know the facts.
That is a very common condition of political debate in any, just about any medium, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a shame, I think, because now political debate is being framed by social media, which is not helpful.
No. I think it's interesting as well. There's you know, thinking about kind of specifically Black British history. I'm thinking about essentially decisions that get made to write people out of history. Places, particularly ports, Cardiff, Bristol, Liverpool,
Yeah,
Southampton, have had really long histories of having diverse populations, specifically Black, often Indian populations as well. In these places, all linked, of course, to sort of slave trade, to empire, to imperialism, as you were saying. These towns don't sort of lack for evidence. Does that make sense? You know, the knowledge is there. Frankie Boyle went because he's from Glasgow, isn't he?
yeah.
And he went around Glasgow with a guy who showed him, you know, almost every single block in Glasgow is built by a slave trader, a slave owner, someone sort of influential in the Caribbean plantation system and all of these things. Street names, statues, squares, public environments, you know, meant to be kind of democratic spaces, are all named after individuals. There's a big thing going on with Gavin Williamson yesterday talking about leaving the statue of Cecil Rhodes. All of these things, it gives you this idea of actually just the deliberate decision.
Well, I mean, it's going to go on and on and on, this conversation, this sort of public debate, which doesn't feel like a debate, really. It feels like there's a few people that are arguing, but the state itself has intervened, hasn't it, recently? So as far as I know, one statue came down, just the one. And that debate about Colston had been happening for years in Bristol before the spring of the Black Lives Matter movement. It was happening for decades before it finally came down, because I guess some of the people had decided that we can't keep talking about it. We're going to just take it down. Whatever. Only one statue came down, but the response from the state became a little bit ridiculous, where the culture secretary is threatening museums. I mean, we're in a time where it's an unprecedented attack when we think about it. So the cultural minister is threatening museums and galleries if it decides to give back the stuff, that some of the things that was stolen. And if you want to have a look at a book that discusses the stuff that was stolen, it's Satnam Sangera's Empire Land, talks about India and the looting of India quite in you know, such devastating terms, but quite eloquently. It's quite scary. So it's not a debate, really. If the state is saying no, 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 then it's not much of a debate, even though, as you say, the evidence is there. The evidence is blatantly there. And I think we're in a really scary time there in terms of protecting what we want. I mean, the whole idea of statues coming down, I mean, the whole Cecil Rhodes thing, I mean, Rhodes must fall, and the decolonizing movement started in South Africa. So there were students whose parents and grandparents had gone through apartheid, and Cecil Rhodes being one of the architects of apartheid, and he's in South Africa and they're walking past his statue. Now, in South Africa, now that is something that I can't imagine how painful that might feel. So I think, yeah, it's a tricky one. The only thing that's tricky is that the state is refusing to recognize that these things happened, and thereby giving a voice to the problem, the people that would rather it stayed someone else's problem.
Yeah, and new laws as well around defacing of statues. Just quickly to add as well, if you're interested in Empire Land by Satnam Sangera, you can watch a very good interview Well, by Désirée and Satnam. So yeah, I think that's on YouTube, Facebook. Go and look at it. I think, unfortunately, we run the risk of going all day. So let's call it a day on the recording here. Thank you so much. This has been, fantastic. Really grateful. Seduce by Désirée Reynolds is published by People Tree Press. You can also find her writing in the Comma Press book of Sheffield. We have a talk with Becca Parkinson of Comma Press coming out this week, so you can find more about it there. Thanks once again to People Tree for sponsoring this talk. If you want to donate any money, if you're in the position to do so and you feel like it, we have our Patreon. That will be in the description below or on our website. Thank you so much for joining us, Désirée. Thanks once again. And no, not at all. And hopefully see you at the next event.
Absolutely. Thank you.